This is the honourable member's inaugural speech. I give the call to the Honourable Steve Martin.
Thank you, President, and may I congratulate you on your election to the role, and also the Honourable Martin Aldridge on his election as Deputy President and Chair of Committees. I wish you both the very best in your new positions. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Whadjuk people? I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to thank the former President, the Honourable Kate Doust, for her advice and wisdom during the induction period for new members. Can I also thank the clerk and his team for the support and assistance I've received since being elected. You've made the somewhat daunting prospect of taking my place in the West Australian Parliament as smooth as possible, and I'm humbled and honoured to have been elected by the voters of the agricultural region. It is the custom in inaugural speeches to outline something of my background. For my introduction today, I'd like to borrow the title of Albert Facey's book, A Fortunate Life. Those of you that have read this inspiring tale will know that Albert is probably the most famous former resident of my hometown, Wickerton. In fact, the Facey homestead was purchased by the Wickerton Council over 20 years ago and relocated from his farm into the centre of town in the main street, where it is a significant attraction to passing travellers. The Council also adopted the title of Albert's life story as our Shire motto, Wickerton, a fortunate place. I grew up on the family farm east of Wickerton, which is at the top of the Great Southern or at the bottom of the wheat belt, depending on your point of view. And my brother Ken, sister Tessa and I were raised in Wickerton by my parents, Pat and Sid. Mum and Dad worked hard on the farm and provided us with a loving home. I was fortunate enough to have a typical country upbringing, plenty of wide open space, freedom to roam the farm, unlocked doors, school, sport, helping out on the farm, relatives everywhere, and a sense of being a part of a small, close-knit community where I knew almost everybody and everybody knew me and my family. We grew up with pet lambs and calves, sheepdogs, fresh eggs from the chook house and plenty of lamb chops. My early memories include sitting on the back of the combine seeder dangling our feet over the harrows, climbing precariously higher on the back of the truck as the hay bales were stacked up by Dad, Mum milking the cow, feeding oats to the sheep from the back of a ute, and of course spending hours in the shearing shed getting in the way of the shearers and playing in the wool. My grandparents lived through the Great Depression and my parents were children during the Second World War and met the challenges thrown up by those two events. And like Albert, they considered themselves extremely fortunate to live in the Wickerton district. My mum, who passed away a few years ago, was born and raised on a farm at Harrismith, a neighbouring district. I have many fond memories of visiting the Astbury farm and our grandparents when we were children. Dad grew up on the Martin farm at the 10 Mile Road. Dad's parents went through some difficult early years before the farm flourished during the 1950s and 60s. Mum and Dad started farming on their own in their early 20s. The farm and family workload for them must have been enormous, but Ken, Tessa and I were constantly driven by our parents all over country WA for sport, for music, social occasions and then boarding school in the city. We were raised in a loving and supportive environment. Our parents never pushed us or offered too much advice. We were fortunate they provided such a fine example of how to treat others and live our lives. I attended Wickerton Primary School and followed by boarding school in Perth, and after a couple of years on the farm working with Dad, I returned to study in Perth, and after a year and a half of perhaps not my finest effort at a journalism degree at the WA Institute of Technology, I successfully applied for a job at the Merredin Telegraph newspaper. The fine print on the job application, which I didn't read, was that the Telegraph was a brand new masthead starting up against the long-established Merredin Mercury, and at 21 years of age I was the editor and only staff member in the newsroom. The Telegraph was to be a very short-lived venture, but I loved it. It gave me a taste for journalism, and the invaluable experience of needing to be self-motivated, and most important of all, I met my wife Debbie while living in Merredin. In a few short years I moved to the Western Farmer in Perth, then to a position with Australian Associated Press in Melbourne and overseas. My last job in the media was at the Sunday Times back here in Perth. I was very fortunate enough during my career in journalism to interview politicians and sports stars, cover world title fights and football finals, from the Wimbledon final to Girl Guide's Biscuit Week in Merredin. Journalism is a great opportunity to see people up close in their finest moments and darkest hours. It's a lens into the best and worst that people can be. It's actually a little like politics. The best journalism is local. So after a decade in journalism, Deb and I looked to Wickerpin as the perfect location to raise a family, and life back on the farm beckoned. My family were very generous in taking me back into the business, and we've been farming as a family partnership ever since. My dad turns 84 in a few weeks. He's been a farmer for over 70 years, and I'm very grateful I've had the opportunity to work with him for almost 30 years. I've certainly benefited from his experience and wisdom. He can't be with us here today because he attended the swearing-in on Monday and wanted to get home. I'm certain he'll be out checking on the sheep and admiring our emerging crops. And my mum, the most genuinely compassionate person I've known in my life. Mum's first thoughts were always for others. Even when she was unwell towards the end of her life, she suffered from a brain tumour and got very frail. She was always thinking of others. She would come to the tennis club on a Sunday night and make sure the kids had an ice cream or a packet of chips. That was just my mum. Mum and Dad were a great team on the farm, and she was the reliable anchor in the lives of her children and grandchildren. Soon after returning to the farm, Deb and I were lucky enough to welcome our two wonderful sons, Darcy and Nicholas, into our family. My wife, Deb, is what farmers call a townie. She's from the country but lived in town, so she did have some moments adjusting to life on the farm. Deb dealt with fires. Our neighbourhood almost burnt us out with the flames getting within a couple of 100 metres of our house while she stood on the veranda holding onto our 6-week-old. She dealt with snakes, lots and lots of snakes, in the laundry, on the veranda, even a friendly carpet snake tapping on our son's bedroom window in the middle of the night trying to get in. She even dealt with the sheep yards. And any farmer will tell you that if a marriage or partnership can survive time spent working with stubborn livestock, it can survive anything. My wife is also a wonderful educator and has worked in a number of small schools in the Great Southern as a teacher and a principal. I share her belief that giving WA children the best possible education is vital. Parents and communities know this instinctively. Early in the 20th century, schools popped up all over country WA as towns and settlements emerged. Within 15 kilometres of our farm, there are monuments to 6 small schools, since closed, which parents would have pushed to have opened so their children could get the best start in life. In fact, Deb is not the only teacher to play an important role in my life. My grandmother, Ethel Sybil, was the first teacher at the Lake Varley School in 1930. There's a famous story in our family that my mother related to me that Ethel lived with a local farming family when she arrived near the school, and such was the value and importance of having a teacher in the community that Ethel was afforded the honour of the first use of the hot bath water on bath night. Kids were next, then Mum and then Dad. Farming's certainly been kind to our family, and I would like to tell you of just a few of the significant changes in the agricultural sector during the past 30 years. The culmination of some of these changes can be seen in last year's grain harvest. In an outstanding result, WA grain farmers in 2020 produced almost 17 million tonnes grown on very little rain. WA growers then marketed that harvest to a wide range of grain traders from around the globe. This result would have been unthinkable even 25 years ago. WA growers have rapidly taken up changes in seeding technology and practices that make the best possible use of every drop of moisture that falls from the sky. Many of those changes, such as no-till farming, were developed in WA. The other major change in recent decades has been the introduction of competition into the market for our grain. For decades, West Australian growers suffered under a single-desk system designed to protect eastern states growers, where the Australian Wheat Board was the only buyer of our wheat. This over-regulation distorted the wheat market in all sorts of ways. Now, I think I can tell this story. I'm fairly certain the statute of limitations has expired, but many decades ago, my grandfather and father smuggled bags of wheat on the back of a truck surrounded by other produce, probably oats, to sell to a produce merchant in the city. Now, they weren't trafficking dangerous contraband, they were smuggling wheat, the stuff you make flour from or feed to chooks. Thanks to the brave and visionary campaign run by West Australians such as Leon Bradley, Gary McGill and Rick Wilson and others, we now have an open market and competition for our wheat, and we are better able to take advantage of world wheat markets. Certainly much has changed in farming, but much remains the same. Although today's farmers might operate a satellite-guided tractor, trade futures on the Chicago Board of Trade or use a drone to monitor their stock, they still lie awake at night waiting for the sound of rain on the roof. They still race outside very early on a spring morning to see if they've dodged a frost, and they still anxiously watch the horizon for smoke during harvest. Just like my grandparents did. I will always have great empathy for people that make their living on the land relying on Mother Nature. As a number of speakers have done this week, I would like to mention my time in local government. Our family has a very proud history of service to the Wickerman Shire community, with my grandfather, father and 3 uncles all serving as councillors. It is a very small town. I've been fortunate enough to spend 20 years on the Wickerman Council, 10 as the Shire President. From my experience, service is the key word with local government councillors, especially on smaller regional shires. Local government certainly has its critics, but the councillors I've got to know are community-minded individuals who give their time and effort in the best interests of their community. Our critics often say that local government should stick to roads, rates and rubbish. I actually agree with the Honourable Peter Forster, who spoke yesterday. Local councillors do so much more. Even in our shire, one of the smaller ones, we provide sports grounds, a swimming pool, community buildings, aged care housing, a library, and we certainly respond quickly and directly to community needs because we are the sector closest to the people. I certainly learnt many valuable lessons in local government. Freeman of the Wickerman Shire, Murray Lang, who can't be here today, he's unwell, would always strongly argue his case, sometimes very strongly. But Murray always respected the person putting the opposing view, and he always acted with the best interests of the broader Wickerman community in mind. I hope to follow his example in this place. I also learnt to be careful of spending other people's money. Raising rates has an added impact when nearly everybody you meet in the main street or at the golf club or at the PNC meeting is a ratepayer, and they know who you are. You can't be anonymous in a small town. The other thing I learned in local government, and it is important on arriving in this place to take our time and learn the ropes, but don't wait too long. As the Leader of the House mentioned in an article recently, she's just served 20 years in this place and it's flown by. Get involved early would be my advice. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the region I represent, the agricultural region. It covers the area between Esperance and Northampton, most of the wheat belt and a good portion of the Great Southern. We are blessed with many spectacular natural assets, from the orcas in the Bremer Canyon off the south coast, our productive agricultural land all the way up to the Coral Coast in Midwest. Some of the important industries in the region include agriculture, horticulture, fishing, mining, energy and tourism. There is also a growing manufacturing and industrial sector spread across the region. The region also contains 2 significant ports in Geraldton and Esperance, vital to shipping the state's produce to the rest of the world. The spectacular natural sites on offer and clean environment also make the agricultural region home to some of the state's most amazing tourist destinations. The Pinnacles, Wave Rock, the Fitzgerald National Park, the Coral Coast and the spectacular beaches on the south coast around Esperance. It's no exaggeration to say that the agricultural region has it all. Of course, our most important asset is our people, and we are a very diverse bunch. For example, Katanning is regional Western Australia's most diverse community, with over 40 nationalities making up this multicultural success story. The Katanning community celebrates this achievement by hosting an annual multicultural festival, which is a highlight of the calendar in the Great Southern. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in the agricultural region and the ancient connection they have to that land. It's extremely important to both acknowledge and promote the long history of Aboriginal people in this state. I want to highlight the very positive contribution Aboriginal people make to our community. I spoke earlier about acknowledging Aboriginal leaders, and I'd like to do so by highlighting several individuals now. The Liberal federal member for Hasluck, the Honourable Ken Wyatt, who spent his early years in Corrigan, and I'm claiming him, is an inspiring Australian leader. Ken is the first Indigenous Australian elected to the House of Representatives, the first to serve as a government minister, the first appointed to Cabinet, and he now serves as the Minister for Indigenous Australians in the Morrison government. Ken continues to address the historical disadvantage of Aboriginal Australians and seek better outcomes for our nation's original inhabitants. A childhood hero of mine, Stephen Michael, a Kojonup local and South Fremantle football great from the 1970s, 80s, and 80s, has lent his name to the Stephen Michael Foundation. Under Stephen's guidance and direction, the Foundation supports disengaged and at-risk youth in the community. Universally respected, Stephen and the Foundation he leads are a beacon of hope in our region. Another project and individual that I've come across during my time as a board member of the Regional Development Australia Wheatbelt Committee is the Noongar Enterprise Development Support Program run by Robert Miles in Balladong country. The program is designed to encourage and support social enterprise and small Aboriginal businesses. Robert's great work as a facilitator in his community is designed to reduce the gap in Aboriginal employment, economic development and social participation. Hopefully his work will inspire local Aboriginal people and organisations to develop their own businesses. Now, I'm also delighted to mention the Honourable Rosie Sahana. I was embarrassed to say I didn't know that she was the first Aboriginal person to serve in this council, and she should be very proud of that achievement. The election result. I would like to congratulate Premier Mark McGowan and the Labor Party on their comprehensive victory in the March election. I want to congratulate all the candidates, whether from political parties or as independents, who ran the election for contributing to our democratic process. I have been where you've been if you lost. This is my, well, I don't know how many times I've run. We often take for granted the minor miracle that we perform in this state every 4 years. We hold a peaceful and well-organised election that all citizens can take part in freely, followed by a peaceful change of government, or in this case, the status quo. In many parts of the globe, elections are either not held or trigger for conflict. We indeed live in a fortunate place. It's particularly exciting to be a part of the largest intake, I believe, in history of new members in the council. I'm certain the clerk has received a large number of emails and calls from anxious first-time members. I know I'm guilty of that. I look forward to seeing how the members of the rookie class of 2021 develop. I'm sure we're all aware of the significant responsibility we've taken on. The gravity of that task was brought home to me very recently when the Honourable Simon O'Brien, who recently gave his farewell speech in this place, was speaking to a group of Liberals, including myself. Now, as some of you would know, Simon never misses an opportunity to use 6 words when 3 will do, but on this occasion he was blunt, straight to the point and very obviously passionate about his topic. Simon spoke strongly about the importance of the Parliament. Not this building, but the institution of Parliament. Parliament protects the weak and vulnerable from the strong and powerful. The West Australian Governor, the Honourable Kim Beazley, reminded us earlier this week when we were sworn in that we, as members of Parliament, are fighting on the front line of democracy. As such, we have a duty to strongly defend the Parliament and the protection it offers our citizens, including the protection of parliamentary privilege. To fail to do so would weaken our great traditions of parliamentary democracy. I make this speech in unusual circumstances. With the voting system that delivered me to the Parliament and the existence of the region that I represent are under a real threat. There has been plenty of discussion about the fairness of the voting system in WA's upper house. Fairness, of course, can be interpreted in many ways. I don't wish to spend too much time today talking about how many members of Parliament will be elected at the next election and where they'll be from. The outcomes of the Labor Party review will take care of that. What I do want to talk about is the people and voters of regional Western Australia. One thing is certain, under the system we have today and under any future system devised by the Labor Party, regional voters will be represented by a minority of MPs in the WA Parliament. We are now and we will be in the future. Despite this, the review currently taking place will likely recommend that regional voters are overrepresented. Now, if you ask the voters in Lake Grace, Wagen or Corrigan, who pay out of their shire rates to have the basic medical services of a GP in their town, whether they are overrepresented in Parliament, I know what the answer will be. If you ask the residents of the Shire of Kent, who were denied permission to develop just a few housing blocks in the town of Pingrup because the Water Authority couldn't guarantee enough water in the pipe, whether they are overrepresented, I know what the answer will be. If you ask regional West Australians more broadly who still battle for adequate mobile phone and internet coverage and pay too much for it compared to the metropolitan area, if they're overrepresented in the WA Parliament, I'm absolutely certain I know what their answer will be. And regional road users, regional families who travel on our country roads, who know that of the 155 fatalities that occurred on WA's roads in 2020, nearly 2/3 occurred in regional WA. Ask them how they feel about being overrepresented in the WA Parliament. The answer from all regional West Australians to those questions will be a resounding no. I will do my best during my time in this place to represent those people and fight to provide a strong regional Liberal voice on these and other issues during my time. I'll just conclude on that. Critics of our system of voting point to a member being elected with less than 100 votes at the recent election. This anomaly caused by group voting tickets could easily have been fixed during the last term of Parliament and can be now without reducing the number of regional voices in Parliament. I'd like to quickly tell you a few things I'd like to achieve during my time here. So providing a strong regional perspective will certainly be one of my aims as a member of this place. Now, it won't come as a surprise to you, I'm sure, to hear from a Liberal Member of Parliament that reducing taxes and regulation is one of my ambitions. Wherever we sensibly can, government should reduce the burden on wage earners and private businesses. And we find ourselves at a point in our economic cycle where a financially strong state such as WA must take some of the responsibility for easing that burden while we can. Australia's economy, and particularly WA's economy, has performed remarkably well by world standards during the COVID pandemic. The fear of double-digit unemployment and large numbers of businesses failing has proved to be unwarranted. However, think back to those early days last year when the news bulletins carried those scenes of long lines of anxious Australians outside Centrelink offices. Our federal government acted quickly and through a rapid and massive injection of cash into the economy with JobKeeper, JobSeeker and other assistance packages to individuals and businesses, managed to see off the worst of the dire predictions. We've quickly forgotten the uncertainty faced by families and businesses during the early months of the pandemic. During the state campaign, I met the owner of an Albany car dealership. She related the story of her business and the awful task she faced having to tell her 80 staff there was no more work. With the survival of her business in doubt, she had no choice but to shut the doors. The announcement of the Morrison government's JobKeeper program enabled her to keep her staff employed and prevented those 80 employees joining the Centrelink queues. Now, the story of that business was obviously replicated all over the country. However, and it is a very big however, this life-saving resuscitation of our economy has meant the federal government debt has grown by hundreds of billions of dollars. Debt, even the prospect of $1 trillion of debt, is not necessarily a problem, at least not in the short term, but it does reduce the ability of government to deal with future shocks. Future shocks such as lower commodity prices, unemployment or a rising Australian dollar, or the big one, rising interest rates. At our current record low interest rates, treasurers all over the world can sleep easily. At a more normal 6 or 7%, they'll be having some sleepless nights. And at a not unprecedented 10 or 12%, they'll be raising taxes and selling off the farm. And that is my point about what we should be doing in WA right now. We are in a sound economic position and need to make our private businesses as competitive as possible. The Liberals always talk about cutting taxes. It's in our DNA. What we don't do sometimes, often enough, is explain why those aims are important. Now, I want to tell you about an example that has come to my attention. Over 20 years ago, I met Alf Baker, a small businessman looking to develop a kaolin deposit in the Wickerpan Shire. Kaolin's the white clay you see in those dams all over the wheat belt. And there's a particularly fine deposit in the east of the Wickerpan Shire. It's used for fiberglass, paper, paint and other products. Now, Alf has spent the best part of 20 years attempting to get this project off the ground. He's spent millions and millions of dollars of his own money along the journey, buying the land, proving up the deposit, finding investors, designing and building the processing plant, securing overseas markets for the kaolin, planning approvals, building approvals, mining approvals, and still with no return in sight. Not a dollar. 20 long years. And now finally the hard work and the expense is paying off. The investors have been found, the markets have been secured and the plant is being built. Every box has been ticked and this will result in dozens of jobs in the Wickerpan district. Certainly the biggest single influx of people into our small community in decades. The hard work of Alf and his team will also result in valuable export income for the state and a sustainable industry that will last for generations. And those people he employs will strengthen the Wickerpan community. They'll send their kids to the local school. They will shop at the local store. They will bolster the numbers at the various sporting clubs. They might volunteer to drive the local ambulance or join a local fire brigade. And what is Alf's reward from the WA government for all that work? The honour and privilege of receiving a bill for payroll tax. Now, we know what the impact of taxation can be on an activity or industry. When governments want to persuade people to smoke less or to stop smoking, one of the measures they take is to increase taxes on cigarettes. When the debate is held around reducing the amount of sugary drinks that people consume, the first response we hear from public health campaigners is put a tax on sugar. It will drive down consumption. And yet what do we do to small businesses like Alf's? We tax jobs. And should we be really surprised that it is a disincentive to employ more people? Small business is hard and it is risky. Let's encourage the tens of thousands of West Australian small businesses to grow and employ more people. Let's encourage people to start a small business and invest in WA's future. And let's do it before the economic cycle turns and we aren't in as strong a position to do something. So if I can achieve anything in this place, it will be to argue and to lobby that the burden of payroll tax is reduced. I promised my father, who I said is not here, that he's a fan of Winston Churchill, so he asked me to get a Winston Churchill quote into the speech. And given the scale of the task I've just set myself to abolish payroll tax, I'll go with one of my favourites from Churchill. I'm an optimist. It does not seem much use being anything else. I believe the best leaders, the best politicians are optimistic people. In this fortunate state, we have much to be optimistic about. I'd like to close by thanking some people very important to me. Again, to the people of the agricultural region, I will strive to represent all of you to the best of my abilities. The Liberal Party. I wasn't elected because of my winning personality or the fact that I'm a household name in the agricultural region. I'm here because I was pre-selected by the Liberal Party. That's an honour and a responsibility that I take very seriously. The Liberal Party is a volunteer political organisation and I will do my very best to live up to the party's expectations and ideals. The Liberal Party believes in limited government, individual rights and the freedom to choose. I share those beliefs. To the dozens of branch presidents, hundreds of branch members, divisional presidents and party leadership, including State President Faye Duda and former State Director Sam Calabrese, I thank you for your support and look forward to working hard on your behalf in the WA Parliament. My good friend, the federal member for O'Connor, Rick Wilson, who helped start me on this journey more than a decade ago, and Senator Slade Brockman. I'd like to thank them both for their support and encouragement. Lex Hardy and Bruce Ayres, and Lex is in the gallery this afternoon. Lex and Bruce have been wonderful supporters of mine from the beginning, and their dedication to the Liberal Party over many decades has been an inspiration to me. Thank you to the various members of the O'Connor Division family that I've grown to know and respect over the years. Alana Lacey, Dom Delavadova, Tom and Victoria Brown, Ron Vagg, Jennifer Oborn, Owen Hall, Brian Mayfield and Murray Nixon in particular. A very, very big thank you to our Liberal candidates that ran in lower house seats in the Ag region. It was a tough election. Darren Slins, Rob Dines, Rob Forster and David Dwyer, I know how hard you worked, how many ties you wore out, the personal sacrifices you and your families made throughout the recent campaign, and I will always be grateful. Our upper house team of Catherine Jackson, the Honourable Jim Chown, Maria Girac and Brett Jackson, thank you for your efforts. I do want to acknowledge the contribution that my predecessor Jim Chown made to the WA Parliament, the agricultural region and the Liberal Party. To my loyal bunch of Liberal supporters in Wickerton, thank you. Tom Sands, John Brown, Dave Asprey and Lindley Rose, thank you for your help over many years. To my Liberal colleagues who have welcomed me to this place, thank you. Finally and most importantly, my family, Mum and Dad. You gave me such a wonderful start in life. I will be forever grateful for your love and support. My sister Tess, who's also here today. Tess has helped out on polling booths for years and gently reminds me of what our mum would think if I get too far ahead of myself. To Ken and Lee, you've kept the farm going when I've been away, and I have been away a lot. Thank you for doing more than your share. Your support, encouragement and regular supply of morning teas have been greatly appreciated. I couldn't have made it here without you. Ken, I'll miss our early morning post-mortems on the fortunes of our beloved Dockers, which after a bad game can last well into the week. My sons, Darcy and Nicholas, I'm so proud of the young men you have become. You keep me grounded and provide me with a politics-free zone. I love you both very much and I'm very proud to be your father. And Deb, thank you for everything. Anything I achieve in this place will be because of you. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and congratulations on your first speech, and I wish you well in this place.